A Hells Angels clubhouse was never meant to sound like a hospital, but tonight, it did. The jukebox was unplugged, the pool ball sat untouched, and the only rhythm in the whole building came from machines that didn't belong here. Monitors shrieking, oxygen pumps hissing, plastic tubing rustling like nervous snakes. On a makeshift bed under a buzzing fluorescent strip, an 11-month-old baby lay too still, his skin drifting toward the wrong shade, his tiny chest fighting for every breath. 15 doctors packed the room shoulder to shoulder, white coats glaring against leather vests and tattooed arms, arguing over charts and numbers and possibilities that never seemed to help. At the edge of that chaos, almost part of the wall, a 7-year-old white boy stood with his little sister's fingers hooked around his wrist. His hoodie hung too big, his sneakers were too thin, and his eyes were too old for his face. He wasn't family, not by blood. He wasn't on any official list. He wasn't supposed to be seen, and he definitely wasn't supposed to talk. But he was watching everything, every movement, every missed detail, every time one of those doctors stepped around the same small object without a second glance. His sister tugged his sleeve and whispered, barely loud enough to rise above the machines, "Bubba, why is it like that?" He followed her gaze, and in that instant something inside him dropped straight through the floor. The doctors were searching inside the baby, arguing over organs and blood and genes. But the boy could feel it in his bones. The thing that was killing that child wasn't inside him at all. It was in the room. It had been in the room the whole time. His throat went dry. His heart hammered. Because in the next few minutes, one of two things was going to happen. If he stayed quiet, the baby might die. If he opened his mouth in a room full of bikers and billion-dollar doctors, he might be the one who paid for it. If stories like this already have your chest tight and your curiosity burning, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on all notifications and settle in, because what this boy is about to do will change everything. The first thing that told everyone this wasn't a normal night wasn't the sirens. It wasn't the black SUVs either, or the unfamiliar faces in expensive suits stepping out of them. The first sign was the silence. The Harlow Ridge Hells Angels clubhouse, a place that normally hummed with low laughter, clinking bottles, and the constant murmur of voices, had gone still enough that you could hear the neon sign outside buzzing against the glass. Where there should have been music, there was a different kind of noise, a metallic, mechanical chaos that didn't understand the rules of this house. Heart monitors beeped in jagged patterns, not the easy, steady rhythm anyone wanted to hear. Portable ventilators sighed in tired bursts. Plastic wheels squeaked on the old warped floorboards as nurses pushed equipment through a hallway that usually only saw boots and beer. The air smelled like rubbing alcohol and cold metal, trying and failing to cover the familiar sense of oil, old wood, leather, and cheap cologne. In the middle of the largest back room, the pool table had been pushed against the wall, the darts pulled from the board, the crooked, "No snitching" sign staring down at a scene it was never meant to witness. In the center of the space, on a reinforced folding bed with clean white sheets someone had definitely stolen from a hospital, lay an 11-month-old baby. His lashes were long and still, his lips a shade no parent ever wants to see, somewhere between blue and gray. Wires and tubes crawled over his little body like vines. A cuff too big for his arm tried to squeeze a blood pressure out of him. Stickers dotted his chest, connecting him to machines that shouted his struggle in numbers and jagged lines. 15 doctors surrounded that bed. 15 different voices, 15 different resumes that could buy a house each, 15 different ideas of what was happening. They had been flown in, driven in, rushed in from every direction. Big city ER legends with their sleeves rolled up. Specialists from clean glass hospitals miles away from this part of town. A pediatric cardiologist who could spot a defect from across the room. An infectious disease expert with 3 degrees and not a single tattoo. Their white coats glowed under the harsh overhead light like they didn't belong. And in this room, in this world, they didn't. The bikers knew that, and the doctors did too. Men who were used to being the loudest presence in any room. Men with shaved heads, heavy rings, and jailhouse eyes. Now stood pressed against the walls, backs flat, arms crossed so tight their knuckles went white. Patches curved across shoulders in red and black. Names and road nicknames stitched in thick thread. Razor, Bishop, Whiskey, Freight, Hex. These were men who didn't flinch when bottles broke or when fists flew. Tonight, their eyes didn't leave the baby. Every time a monitor changed its tone, every time a doctor cursed under his breath, you could see those big men tense like they'd been hit. The chapter president, a broad man with gray in his beard and a reputation that made grown men polite, stood at the foot of the bed. His vest was open, his hands bare. He didn't speak. He didn't smoke. He didn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on the tiny chest rising and falling in uneven stutters. People who knew him well would have said he looked like someone had taken a crowbar to his ribs and left it there. At the door, two men stood guard, not to keep anyone out so much as to keep the panic from spilling into the rest of the building. In the hallway, more bikers paced, boots thudding a choked rhythm into the old floor. Conversations started and died in half-sentences. No one laughed. No one joked. No one said it out loud, but the fear sat heavy in the air, thick and undeniable. Near the back of the room, half-shadowed by a battered vending machine that hadn't worked properly in years, a boy stood with his shoulders slightly hunched, like he was trying to fold himself into a smaller shape. 7 years old, white, hair too long for school pictures and too short for the rock posters on the clubhouse walls. His hoodie swallowed his frame. The sleeves were rolled up twice and still hung over his wrists. On his feet, sneakers whose soles had started to peel at the edges. His hands were free, his pockets empty. His eyes were not. They tracked everything. He watched the doctors move. Who was confident? Who was scared? Who was pretending not to be either? He watched them touch the baby, lift his eyelids, shine lights into his pupils, adjust ventilator settings in tiny increments like breaking a code. He paid attention to which machines they reset and which they just glared at, as if glaring hard enough could change the numbers. His little sister stood pressed against his side. She was 5, small enough that the patched men towered over her like a forest of leather and denim. Her hair was pulled back in a crooked ponytail that had started the day tight and had surrendered somewhere around hour 3. She chewed on the corner of her sleeve, eyes wide and unblinking. Every time someone raised their voice, she flinched, and his hand tightened its grip on hers. It wasn't a conscious decision. He didn't think about it. Somewhere deep in his muscles, the order had been given a long time ago. Don't let go. The kids weren't on the visitor list. They weren't supposed to be anywhere near this room. Their mother was in the kitchen several doors down, hands in dishwater, pretending she couldn't hear the sirens that had screamed up to the clubhouse an hour ago. Pretending she didn't know exactly what it meant when the president himself walked into the kitchen and said, without looking at her, "Stay put." The boy had disobeyed. Not entirely, not loudly. He hadn't burst through doors or shouted. He had slipped through cracks the way only small, quiet people know how to do. A pause in conversation here, a half-open door there, a moment when everyone else was turned toward the street. It wasn't his first time moving invisibly in this place. It was just the first time it had really mattered. Now he stood where he could see and not be seen, where he could listen and not be dragged away, where his sister could hide her face against his sleeve whenever a doctor cursed or a machine wailed. His saturation is dropping. The words cut through the air like a blade. One of the doctors, a tall man with sharp cheekbones and the kind of glasses that screamed expensive, stared at the monitor. Numbers glowed in bright, uncaring digits. "That doesn't make sense," another snapped. "We've cycled through every protocol we have. This isn't respiratory." His heart rate's all over the place, a third said, voice lower, more tired. "If this was structural, we'd see it on the echo. It's not. So what is it?" Their words tangled, collided, tripped over each other. Infection. Autoimmune. Metabolic. Something congenital we missed. Someone muttered the word toxin and was immediately drowned out by 3 different rebuttals. The boy understood maybe every 5th word, but he didn't need the medical language. He had the music, and the music was wrong. Machines weren't supposed to scream like that. A baby wasn't supposed to sound like he was learning how to breathe for the first time all over again, and losing. The boy's sister tugged his sleeve again, harder this time. "Bubba," she whispered, her voice small but oddly steady. "Why is it like that?" He followed the direction of her gaze. Not to the baby, not to the doctors, not to the president with his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. Her eyes had drifted to something sitting on a low shelf beside the bed, something people had set their charts next to, something a nurse had moved once, absent-mindedly, and then forgotten. It had been there when they wheeled in the machines. It had been there when the first doctor arrived. It had been there when the boy first peeked through the doorway, heart pounding in his chest. He had seen it then. He saw it now. Only now, with the monitors screaming a higher, more frantic tone, with the doctors' voices getting sharper and more desperate, with his sister's fingers digging into his skin, did his brain finally catch up to his eyes. He froze. The air seemed to thicken around him, pressing against his ribs. His mind grabbed at a memory, another room, another smell, another warning spoken in a rough voice over a kitchen table. Don't touch that. Keep away from that. If you ever see that, you walk around it. Bubba, why is it like that? Because nobody's looking at the right thing, he thought. Because they can't see what we can. Because if I don't say it, nobody will. He took a breath that didn't reach his lungs. His fingers tightened around his sister's hand until she winced. He forced himself to loosen his grip. There comes a moment, in every story that matters, where silence becomes its own kind of choice. Where not speaking is louder than any scream. Where staying safe feels a lot like helping something die. For this boy, in this room, under that buzzing light and that crooked sign, that moment had just arrived. If you're still here, heart pounding a little harder, and you want to know what happens when a 7-year-old breaks every rule he's ever learned in front of killers, doctors, and a dying child, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because the next chapter is where he decides whether to stay invisible or do the unthinkable. The boy hadn't been born knowing how to disappear. It was a skill, like tying shoes or riding a bike, except nobody ever sat him down and taught it step by step. He learned it in the spaces between adult sentences, in the look his mother gave him when certain men were around, in the way her fingers dug into his shoulder for just a second too long when she hissed, "Stay out of the way, you hear me?" He heard her. He listened. He practiced. By 7, he had perfected the art. He knew exactly which floorboards in the hallway creaked and which ones could carry his weight without a sound. He knew how to stand so his shadow folded into someone else's. He knew how to breathe shallow when tempers flared, how to slide behind the big jukebox by the door when strangers came in and loud voices followed. Being invisible wasn't magic. It was survival. His mother worked for the clubhouse, though nobody had ever written it down on paper. No timesheets, no tax forms, no job title. She just showed up one day with 2 small kids and a look in her eyes that said she'd run out of road. The president had let her wash dishes for cash. Over time, dishes turned into floors, floors turned into laundry, laundry turned into watch the front for a minute. I gotta take this call. She kept the place from collapsing under its own chaos, scrubbing away beer rings, sweeping up glass, sewing patches back onto vests that smelled like cigarettes and rain. She didn't wear a uniform. She wore whatever was clean and didn't make her stand out. Why here? People had asked her once or twice, before realizing the question itself was rude. Because they pay in cash and don't ask questions, she'd said, eyes on the plate she was rinsing. She didn't mention the other part. That in this building, for all its noise and fights and secrets, there were rules. Harsh ones, ugly ones, but rules all the same. People followed them. People enforced them. For a woman who had spent too much time around men who only obeyed their own moods, the rigid code of the clubhouse was a strange kind of safety. The boy had grown up inside that code. Rule number 1. If the president says out, you go. Rule number 2. If the patches are in a circle talking low, you stay far away. Rule number 3. Kids don't talk business. Not at the bar, not in the lot, not in the hallway. He didn't know all the details. He didn't care to. What he knew was that this place, with its broken bar stools and sticky floors and neon lights that never quite matched, was the reason he and his sister had shoes and food and a roof that didn't leak on every rainy night. But just because a place keeps you alive doesn't mean it's gentle. He'd seen enough to understand that raised voices turned into broken plates, turned into broken noses if you didn't keep your head down. He'd watched as a man laughed too loud at the wrong joke and found himself dragged into the parking lot. He'd heard the thud of fists through the walls, the sharp snap of someone's patience giving way. Invisible kids didn't cause problems. Invisible kids weren't blamed when things went wrong. Invisible kids lived long enough to become invisible teenagers. That was the plan. His little sister didn't make it easy. She was sugar where he was salt. Where he folded into corners, she drifted toward the center of things like a moth toward a lamp. She asked questions that could get grown men in trouble if they answered them honestly. She had a way of looking at the toughest biker in the room like he was just a large, slightly confused uncle, and somehow, she hadn't been corrected yet. Once, she'd walked up to a man whose arms were a map of ink and scars, stared at the skull on his vest, and asked, "Why your jacket got a dead head on it?" The entire bar had gone silent for 2 long seconds. Then the man had barked out a laugh he hadn't known he had left in him, and said, "Because I ran out of flowers, kid." The boy had nearly fainted from the adrenaline. Afterward, in the kitchen, his mother had grabbed his sister by the shoulders and hissed, "You can't say things like that. You're not like them. They don't have to forgive you." His sister had nodded solemnly, then promptly forgotten 2 days later when she told another biker his beard made him look like a sad lion. The boy's job, as he saw it, was simple: keep her from wandering too close to the edge of a cliff she couldn't see. If she was a bright, buzzing little orbiting planet, he was gravity, gently tugging her back whenever she drifted toward danger. He learned other things in this place besides how to hide. The clubhouse was a classroom nobody wrote about. He learned how to read moods faster than textbooks. He could tell, by the way someone slammed a bottle down, whether the conversation at the table was about money, loyalty, or something worse. He could tell from the way a man lit his cigarette, fast, slow, trembling, precise, whether tonight was going to end in laughter or sirens. In the back lot, leaning against the same busted fence every afternoon, he learned from the older guys how engines worked. Not the neat diagrams from a school book, but the way Real motors sounded when they were sick. He knew the click of a dead battery, the cough of bad fuel, the faint whining rattle of a belt that was about to snap. He'd watched grease-stained hands pull apart carburetors and fuel pumps, listened to curses and jokes and stories about machines that betrayed people and people who betrayed machines. Somewhere in between those lessons, he picked up other knowledge too, the kind that wasn't written down in manuals. "Don't breathe that in," one man had told him once, slapping his hand away from a canister with a cracked valve. "That stuff will kill you slow." "Don't ever drink from an open bottle you didn't see poured," another had said. "Don't matter if you're 8 or 80. Smell that," a third had asked one night when they stepped into the garage and the air carried a faint, metallic tang. If you ever walk in somewhere and the air tastes like pennies, you turn around. That means something's leaking that ain't supposed to. His brain collected these warnings like baseball cards, sorted them, stacked them, filed them away. He didn't know when he'd need them. He just knew he would. Then there were the stories. The ones you heard when the jukebox was too loud for anyone to care who was listening. The ones whispered in corners when someone thought the kids were asleep in the office on that old sofa with the busted springs. Stories about bad batches, bad deals, bad mixes. People who didn't wake up. People who never made it to the hospital. From those, he learned a quieter lesson. Grown-ups didn't always know what they were doing. Money didn't always mean smart. Power didn't always mean safe. Sometimes the only difference between the person who lived and the person who didn't was who noticed the danger first. He never expected that person to be him. The baby hadn't been around long. 11 months wasn't a lifetime, but it was enough to turn the entire rhythm of the clubhouse on its head. The first time someone brought that tiny bundle through the door, wrapped in a blanket with eyes like little flashlights, the room had changed. Men who could break noses without blinking suddenly forgot what to do with their hands. The president had laughed, an unguarded sound that made the boy's sister look at him in amazement. Someone had put ear protectors on the baby's head when the music got too loud. Someone else taped foam over the sharp metal corner of a table that had been there for years. The boy watched it all, fascinated. He had seen tough softened before, for his sister, occasionally, for his mother when someone remembered to say thank you. But this was different. This was a tiny person who didn't know anything about engines or patches or codes, and yet somehow, everyone bent around him like he was the center of gravity. He found himself timing his trips down the hall so he could catch glimpses of the baby when someone carried him to the president's office for a quiet nap. His sister, never subtle, dragged a chair to the kitchen door and sat guard whenever she knew the little one was in the building, as if the entire outside world might try to barge in. They didn't talk about why it mattered so much. They didn't know the politics, the lineages, the whispered conversations about legacy and vulnerability. All they knew was that when the baby babbled and waved his arms, the room felt less cold. So when the sirens finally did come one night, not the distant kind you hear passing by, but the immediate, panicked kind that skid right to your front door, The boy's stomach had dropped before anyone said a word. He was in the side hall when he saw the president's face for the first time that evening. The man's eyes were wrong. He didn't look angry. He didn't look drunk. He looked emptied out, like somebody had taken a scooper and pulled everything solid out of his chest. "Kitchen," he had said to their mother. "Stay there. Keep them in there with you." The boy had obeyed. For about 30 seconds. 30 seconds of listening to his mother's breathing turned sharp and uneven. 30 seconds of his sister asking, "Is it a fire? Is it police?" 30 seconds of hearing heavy boots and heavier equipment rolling down the hallway. Then the silence. That terrible, unnatural silence. He couldn't stand it. Invisible didn't mean blind. Invisible didn't mean deaf. And if something had happened to that baby, if the room full of men who liked to pretend they didn't care were suddenly this quiet, he needed to know why. So he did what he did best. He slipped through the kitchen door when someone came in for ice, past the storage room while a crate was being moved, around the corner while a nurse in blue scrubs stared down at her phone. He found his place beside the broken vending machine, pulled his sister in front of him just enough that she could see, but not enough that she could wander. He lifted his chin, just a fraction, and looked. Machines, wires, white coats, a baby too still. And somewhere, in the edges of his mind, the old lessons stirred. Don't breathe that. Don't touch that. If the air tastes like pennies. He didn't know it yet, but everything he had ever learned about staying alive, about reading rooms, about listening to the things adults left unsaid, that whole invisible education, was about to be tested. Because being invisible had kept him safe his whole life. But tonight, to keep anyone safe at all, he might have to do the one thing he'd trained himself never to do. He might have to step into the center of the room. If you're following every beat and you're ready to see what happens when a kid who knows all the rules finally decides to break them, make sure you're subscribed, notifications on, and stay with this story, because the moment he stops hiding is closer than anyone in that room realizes. The first time someone said the word toxin, it slipped out so quietly it almost drowned in the noise. The boy heard it anyway. He had always been good at hearing the words people didn't intend to say out loud. In classrooms, that meant catching answers muttered under teachers' breaths. Here, it meant catching fragments of conversations doctors thought were confined to their tight little cluster around the bed. "Could be a toxin," a younger doctor murmured, eyes flicking to one of the monitors. "Timeline fits." A second doctor shook his head without even looking up. "We've screened everything we can. No ingestion, no obvious source. Parents say no access to anything." The word died there, smothered by the others. "Infection, virus, autoimmune, idiopathic," one of them said, which was a fancy way of saying, "We don't know and we don't like admitting that." The boy's sister shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the rubber soles of her shoes whispering against the floor. "He looks like my doll when the battery's almost gone," she whispered, eyes fixed on the baby. "Like he wants to move, but he can't." The boy swallowed. "Don't talk too loud," he whispered back. But his attention wasn't on her. It wasn't even entirely on the baby. It was on the perimeter. He watched as doctors stepped around the same object by the bed over and over again. A nurse bumped it with her hip, muttered under her breath, and nudged it back into place with one hand while adjusting and four with the other. A biker, leaning in for a closer look at the monitor, grabbed the edge of it for balance, then wiped his hand on his jeans, frowning at the faint residue it left behind. Nobody looked at it for more than a second. Nobody commented on it. In a room overflowing with equipment, it read to them as background, decoration, clutter. To the boy, it was a footprint at a crime scene. The air near the bed was different. Not just because of the alcohol and plastic and cold metal. There was another smell layered under it, faint but sharp. Not quite sweet, not quite metallic. The kind of smell you didn't notice until someone pointed it out. The kind of smell that, once you recognized it, you could never unsmell. His brain dug through its filing cabinet of memories again. Garage nights, warnings, stories. If the air tastes like pennies had been one lesson, there had been others. Like, if something you bring into a room makes the room smell different and your body feel wrong, that something is the problem, not your body. He thought about the baby, 11 months old. No job, no habits, no access to anything he wasn't handed. For this kid to be this sick, something either had to be broken inside him from the start, or something had gotten to him from the outside. The doctors were still wrestling with the first idea. The boy couldn't stop thinking about the second. He shifted just enough to give himself a better angle. His sister, pressed against him, moved too, her head tilting. "Bubba," she whispered. "Why is that whatever shiny?" He followed her gaze. The object by the bed caught the overhead light and threw it back in a way that made his teeth clench. There, along its surface, was a faint, slick gleam. On a good day, you'd call it pretty. Tonight, he called it wrong. He watched a doctor brush his sleeve against it, then reach down to adjust the pulse ox clip on the baby's toe. He watched a nurse rest a gloved hand on it, then tug at the blanket near the baby's face. He watched the president's fingers flex once, just above it, before he pulled his hand back like the thing had burned him. Nobody flinched. Nobody gasped. Nobody said, "What is that exactly?" The boy's heart picked up speed. He thought back to 3 days earlier. Tuesday. The sky outside the clubhouse had been the color of dirty dishwater, threatening rain and then changing its mind. A truck had pulled into the lot mid-afternoon, one of those delivery rigs that seemed to know its way around every back alley in town. He had been out back, supposedly taking trash to the big dumpster that always smelled like last week's regrets. The truck driver had hopped down, grunted something that sounded like a greeting, and opened the back of the trailer. Inside, boxes, crates, things that looked boring until you remembered where you were and who lived here. "Stay off the ramp," one of the bikers had called to him. "You get your foot under that. We're not taking you to the nice hospital." He nodded, stayed back, watched. Because that's what he did. He remembered the moment now with unsettling clarity. One of the boxes had come open on the corner as they hauled it out. Something had shifted inside. A smaller package had slid, tipped, and nearly tumbled off the dolly. The biker had grabbed it, muttered about cheap tape, and passed it off to someone else. The second man had held it away from his body, looking faintly annoyed, like whatever was inside wasn't his style. He'd carried it past the boy, up the stairs, down the hallway, toward the president's office. The boy had caught a whiff of something as it passed. Faint, harmless seeming. Something that made him think of a story he couldn't quite remember. He'd almost followed them. Almost. Then his mother's voice had echoed from the kitchen, sharp and tired. "If you don't get back in here in the next 10 seconds, you're washing every plate by yourself." He'd gone back. Of course he had. Invisible kids did not chase mysterious boxes up hallways. They washed plates. They stayed out of trouble. They tried not to think about smells that made the hair on their arms stand up. Now, watching the light glint off the object by the bed, he realized where that smaller package had ended up. The baby's chest hitched. The monitor screamed another alarm. One of the doctors cursed and barked. "We're losing pressure." Voices layered on top of each other, a tangle of instructions and argued interpretations. One wanted to intubate now. Another snapped that doing so would be overkill without a clear diagnosis. A third insisted on another round of tests. The boy's sister squeezed his hand so hard his fingers tingled. "I don't like this," she whispered. "Make them stop." He wished he could. He wished someone would. He wished, more than anything, that one of those doctors would look away from the screen in front of them and see what he saw. But they didn't. They couldn't. Years of training had taught them to look inward, into blood work and images and charts. Their eyes were trained for the inside. The outside details blurred into a background they mentally labeled environment and filed under "not my job." The boy, who had never been to medical school, had grown up in the opposite direction. He understood the environment better than he understood his own homework. He knew that in certain rooms, certain smells meant leave, certain sounds meant duck, certain looks meant find a door and go through it. He knew that objects weren't neutral. They were either safe or not, and the difference mattered more than people ever wanted to admit. Right now, that difference might be the line between life and death for a child who still slept with his arms thrown over his head like he hadn't learned yet that the world could be cruel. He felt the decision building inside him like a storm. He could walk back down the hallway, take his sister's hand, lead her to the kitchen, and pretend they had never seen any of this. He could help his mother scrub dishes until his fingers wrinkled, listen to her humming under her breath, and pretend that the sirens had gone somewhere else, that the quiet hadn't descended like a curtain over the only place that had ever given them shelter. He could do what he had been trained to do since he was old enough to understand the word danger. Or he could step forward, just one step, out of the shadow of the busted vending machine. into the narrow space between the wall and the edge of the bed, into the range of vision of 15 people who had no reason to listen to him and every reason to tell him to shut his mouth. He could open that mouth anyway. His throat felt like it had swallowed sandpaper. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. He imagined the president's eyes landing on him, that heavy weight of judgment. He imagined his mother's face when she found out he'd disobeyed her. He imagined his sister, watching him, learning from him, and the thought of teaching her the wrong lesson made his stomach twist. But he also imagined something else. The baby's chest, rising easier. The monitor, settling into a calmer rhythm. The sound of a doctor, just one saying, "Wait." He might be right. He didn't know how likely that was. He only knew it was more likely if he spoke than if he stayed quiet. Somewhere deep inside him, a scale tipped. He took a slow breath, counted to 3 the way he did when he had to stick his hand into the dishwater and hoped there wasn't a broken glass at the bottom. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, before he could remember all the reasons this was a terrible idea, he took that first step. If you're still with this boy, feeling that tight knot in your own chest as he moves from the shadows toward the center of the storm, make sure you're subscribed and your notifications are on, because the next chapters are where he stops just watching the story and starts rewriting it with a choice no 7-year-old should ever have to make. From the moment he stepped out of the shadows, time stopped moving the way it was supposed to. The boy felt it first in his feet. 1 second they were rooted to the sticky floor beside the broken vending machine. The next, they were carrying him forward, past the edge of the wall, past the invisible line he had never crossed before. His sister's fingers slipped from his hand as he moved, her surprised little gasp swallowed by the chorus of machines. The first person to notice him wasn't a doctor or the president. It was one of the nurses, a woman with tired eyes and a ponytail that had lost its battle with gravity hours ago. She glanced up from the 4 bag she was checking and froze for half a heartbeat when she saw the small figure edging into the open. "Hey," she started, more out of instinct than anger. That one syllable turned 15 heads. The boy felt their attention hit him like a physical shove. Doctors, bikers, nurses, all turning at once, all seeing him clearly for the first time. He wanted to duck back, to pretend he'd just wandered in by mistake, but it was too late. He was visible now. There was no pulling the curtain closed again. "What is this?" one of the doctors snapped, the words sharp and brittle. "Whose kid is that? Get him out of here." A biker near the door pushed off the wall, eyes narrowing. "Hey, little man. Wrong room." His voice tried to be gentle, but it shook around the edges. He wasn't used to being gentle while terrified. The president's gaze found the boy and stayed there. The man didn't say anything, but something in his expression made the boy's chest tighten. This wasn't the look the president gave when someone broke a glass or tracked mud across clean floors. This was the look he gave when someone crossed a line painted in blood. The boy's legs almost stopped. Almost. Behind him, he heard his sister whisper, "Bubba, don't." He wanted to tell her he agreed. He wanted to tell her he was going to turn around, walk back, pretend none of this had ever happened. But the words that came out of his mouth weren't the ones he rehearsed in his head his whole life. "It's not his heart," he said. His voice sounded wrong in his own ears, too loud, too small at the same time. "It's the thing in the room." Silence landed so hard it might as well have been another piece of equipment. "The what?" one of the doctors said slowly, like he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. The boy swallowed. His throat burned. His palms were slick. Every instinct he had screamed at him to shut up. But once you crack the door on silence, it doesn't close easily. "You keep looking at him," the boy said, nodding toward the baby, who lay motionless between them, lost beneath wires and tape. "But nobody's looking at that." He lifted his chin toward the object by the bed, the one that had sat there like a piece of scenery while the world fell apart around it. For a moment, nobody followed his gaze. Their eyes stayed on his face, on his too big hoodie and too thin shoes, on the way his shoulders shook despite his best efforts to hold them still. Then, slowly, like the whole room was on the same delay, a few pairs of eyes drifted sideways. "The what?" one of the bikers said. "That." The boy's voice cracked. He pointed now, arm trembling. Subtlety was pointless. He'd already shattered any chance of blending back into the background. "The thing by the bed. It wasn't here before he got sick. Now it is. And the air smells wrong." A doctor exhaled sharply, a sound that might have been a laugh on any other night. "This is not helpful. Please remove him from the room. We are in the middle of. Hold up, another doctor said quietly. He was older, with silver at his temples and lines carved deep between his brows. What do you mean? The air smells wrong. The boy blinked. He hadn't expected that question. It took him a second to find the words. It smells, he fumbled, reaching for something they'd understand. Like the garage when the big tank leaked last winter. Like pennies, and like something you're not supposed to breathe for too long. My head feels funny over here. One of the nurses shifted, frowning. I thought that was just the antiseptic, she muttered, almost to herself. The younger doctor rolled his eyes. This is absurd. We've got a critical infant, and we're talking about smells. He stepped forward, hand outstretched, reaching for the boy's shoulder to steer him toward the door. The boy flinched back. Don't touch him. His sister's small voice piped up from the doorway, surprising everyone. She had followed him out of the shadows after all, clutching the edge of the vending machine with both hands. He's right. It was the least convincing argument in the world, and yet somehow, in that strange, stretched moment, it added weight. Not the weight of authority, but the weight of something simpler, belief. Kid, a biker near the wall said, rubbing a hand over his mouth, you don't know what you're talking about. Go back to your mom. The boy shook his head. His heart felt like it was going to punch a hole through his ribs. I do know, he said. I saw it come in. In a box. 3 days ago. They carried it past me. The room didn't smell like this before that. 3 days, the older doctor repeated, eyes narrowing as he looked. Not at the boy, but at the object itself now. That's around when his symptoms started escalating. The younger doctor sighed. Correlation is not causation. Maybe not, the older one said, stepping closer to the shelf. But it's a lead, and we're running out of those. He reached out and touched the side of the object with 2 fingers. When he pulled them back, they glistened faintly under the hospital light. He frowned. What is this residue? A biker shifted uncomfortably. Came as a gift, he muttered. From doesn't matter who. Looked nice. Boss liked it. The president's eyes, which had not left the boy since he stepped forward, finally dragged themselves toward the shelf. He stared at the object for a long, dangerous second. Who brought it in? He asked quietly. No one answered. Or maybe they did, and the boy just couldn't hear it over the roar in his own ears. Because now that someone else was looking, really looking, his courage started to drain, leaving behind nothing but fear. He had done it. He had broken the rule. He had put a spotlight on himself in a place where spotlights got people crushed. The younger doctor, still unconvinced, made a sharp gesture. Even if that thing is releasing something, it wouldn't cause this fast, not in this way. We cannot. The baby's monitor shrieked, louder and more urgent than before. The little body on the bed jerked once, then sagged. BP dropping, someone called. We're losing him, another said. The boy's chest constricted. This was it. He was out of time. They all were. Talking wasn't enough. Pointing wasn't enough. Somewhere between one beat of the monitor and the next, something inside him snapped. Not in the breaking way. In the way of a rubber band finally released. He moved before anybody could stop him. 1 second he was standing just inside the circle. The next, he had darted forward, a small streak of motion where nobody expected motion to be. A doctor reached for him and caught nothing but air. A biker shouted his name, but it came a fraction too late. He reached the shelf, grabbed the object with both hands, and yanked. It was heavier than it looked. His arm screamed. The slick residue smeared beneath his fingers. For a terrifying moment, he thought he'd misjudged, that it would stay anchored there while everyone watched him struggle. Then it came free with a jerk that nearly toppled him. The room exploded. What the? Hey, put that down. Voices crashed over him, but he barely heard them. The smell intensified as he lifted the thing, holding it away from his body the way he'd seen grown men carry leaking canisters. His eyes burned. His head swam. He stumbled backward, heart slamming, and did the only thing his instincts could offer. He headed for the door. They didn't move fast enough to catch him before he reached it. Shock buys you a few seconds, even in a room full of people who thrive on chaos. Open it, he yelled, half to himself, half to anyone who would listen. The biker by the door, reacting more to the command in the boy's voice than to the words themselves, slammed his hand against the crash bar. The door flew open, letting in a burst of cooler air from the hallway. The boy stumbled through it, the object clutched in his hands, and kept going. Behind him, the monitor kept screaming. If this moment has you gripping your own seat, wondering whether he just saved that baby or made everything worse, now is the time to hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. Because what happens after he rips the danger out of that room will change not just the baby's fate, but his own. The hallway outside the makeshift hospital room had never seen so much action. On a normal night, it was just a corridor connecting the world of pool tables and dartboards to the quieter back rooms where business was handled and doors stayed closed. Tonight, it became the stage for something no one in that building would ever forget. The boy's sneakers slapped the worn floorboards as he ran, the object heavy and awkward in his hands. It bumped against his chest with every stride, leaving streaks of that slick residue on his hoodie. The smell grew sharper, crawling up his nose and down his throat like invisible smoke. "Kid," a voice thundered behind him. He didn't look back. Looking back meant slowing down, and slowing down meant someone could grab him, drag him, turn him around, and march him right back into that room, and that air, and that sound of a baby's heartbeat trying to outrun death. His sister's small feet pattered after him for a few frantic steps, then slowed. She wasn't as fast as he was, and she knew it. He heard her choke out his name and wanted to tell her to stay back, to stay safe, to stay with Mom. The words tangled in his throat and died there. He skidded to a stop near the end of the hall, where an emergency exit door waited, its metal handle cold and indifferent. He braced the object against his knee, shoved the bar with his shoulder, and kicked his way out into the night. The air outside hit him like a bucket of water. Cold, sharp, honest. It rushed into his lungs, pushing out the heavy, metallic taste he hadn't even realized he was carrying. He staggered a few steps into the parking lot, boots scrunching on gravel and broken glass. The clubhouse loomed behind him, its windows glowing, neon sign buzzing over the door like a drunk firefly. The sirens that had brought the doctors were still parked out front, their lights spinning silently now, painting the lot in red and blue. For one dizzy second, he considered hurling the object as far as his small arms could throw it, just to get it away from the building. But the memory of warnings echoed through his head. Don't throw something if you don't know what's in it. You might make it worse. He settled for setting it down roughly on the cracked asphalt, several yards from the door. His hands shook as he did it. His fingers tingled. His head felt lighter, and not in a good way. Behind him, the door banged open. Two bikers burst through it, followed by one of the doctors and a nurse holding a portable monitor. The device beeped steadily, its screen a glowing square of information. The nurse's eyes were wide, darting between the numbers and the boy. "What did you do?" one of the bikers demanded. He was a big man, beard thick, arms corded with muscle, veins standing out like ropes. His vest hung open, patches shifting as his chest heaved. "Are you out of your mind?" The boy didn't answer. He couldn't. His lungs were too busy dragging in air like they'd never tasted it before. The doctor stepped past the bikers, out into the open, his gaze locked on the boy. He held the portable monitor in his hand, the little device still linked wirelessly to the main machine inside. "Look," he said. His voice was calmer than anyone expected. They all turned toward the screen. The numbers had been a jagged horror show minutes ago, bouncing, dropping, spiking in ways that made even seasoned professionals grit their teeth. Now, they weren't perfect, not by a long shot, but they were better. The oxygen saturation, once flirting with disaster, had ticked up a few crucial points. The heart rate, which had been careening wildly, had settled into a rhythm that, while still too fast, at least looked like something a heart could sustain for more than a few breaths. "That's not possible," the younger doctor said from the doorway, as if he'd followed them despite himself. "We haven't changed anything. We haven't administered," he trailed off, eyes narrowing. Except he pulled that thing out of the room," the older doctor finished. The bikers stared between the monitor, the object on the asphalt, and the boy. "You telling me that piece of junk was choking my kid?" one of them asked, voice low and dangerous. "We don't know that yet," the older doctor said quickly. "We can't make that leap without testing. But the timing is compelling." "Compelling?" the man snarled. "My boy's dying in there, and you're giving me compelling." The boy flinched at the edge in his tone, but he forced himself to stand still. He knew what it looked like. A 7-year-old, streaked with mystery residue, shaking, having just yanked something out of a room full of professionals without asking. The president stepped outside then, moving slower than the others, like every step cost him more than he wanted to admit. His gaze went first to the boy, then to the object on the ground, then back to the monitor in the doctor's hand. "Talk to me," he said. His voice was hoarse, but steady. The older doctor exhaled through his nose, a weary, measured sound. "Since that item was removed from the immediate environment, the baby's vitals have begun to stabilize. It might be coincidence. It might not. Either way, we need that thing secured, tested, and out of everyone's reach." The president stared at the object like it had insulted him personally. "You're saying this gift did this?" "I'm saying," the doctor replied carefully, "that it could have released something into the air. A vapor, a gas, a particulate. Some compounds can cause serious symptoms when inhaled, especially in confined spaces and in someone as small as an infant. Removing a source of exposure can sometimes lead to rapid improvement, depending on the substance and the exposure level." None of the bikers cared about the technicalities. They cared about the part where the baby was breathing easier. They cared about the part where someone had brought something into their home that might have been designed to hurt what they cared about most. The president's jaw clenched. For a moment, the boy thought the man was going to walk over, pick up the object, and smash it into 1,000 pieces. He half wanted him to. He half feared what might happen if he did. Instead, the president turned to the older doctor. "You test it," he said. "You find out exactly what it is, what it does, and how to make sure it never touches my family again." The doctor nodded once. "We'll need protective equipment. A containment bag. I'd prefer a forensic lab, but we can at least start with." He broke off, glancing down at the monitor again. The little line tracing the baby's heartbeat had smoothed a bit more, the peaks less erratic. "His numbers are still climbing," the nurse whispered, awe in her voice. The boy let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His knees threatened to fold. "Don't you dare fall over," one of the bikers growled, stepping closer. But there was something in his tone that didn't quite match the words. Some frayed thread of admiration, or maybe just relief. The president finally turned his full attention on the boy. "Why'd you do it?" he asked. No anger, no shouting, just that quiet question. The boy swallowed. Every answer sounded stupid in his head. "Because it smelled wrong. Because no one else was looking at it. Because I couldn't stand there and do nothing while he turned gray. Because my sister asked why it was shiny." In the end, he went with the only truth that mattered. "Because no one else was going to," he said. The president stared at him for a long time. Long enough that the boy started counting cracks in the asphalt to keep from shaking apart. Behind them, inside the building, the machines continued their steady, frantic music. But their tone had shifted. The shrill, panicked alarms had eased into something more manageable. Not safe, not yet, but less catastrophic. The older doctor straightened. "We need to get back in there," he said. "This buys us time. We still have to stabilize him fully." "Go," the president said. The doctors and nurse disappeared back through the door, the monitor's glow fading with them. The bikers lingered, eyes still on the object on the ground. The president stepped closer to the boy. Up close, the man seemed even larger, not because of his size, but because of the weight he carried in his gaze. "You disobeyed my order," he said quietly. The boy's throat closed. He nodded. "You left the room I told your mother to keep you in. You stepped into something you had no business stepping into. You grabbed something nobody understood, and you dragged it out of there like the building was on fire." The boy nodded again, each admission like a stone added to the pile that might bury him. "And in the process," the president went on, "you might have just given my boy a chance he didn't have 10 minutes ago." The boy blinked. He hadn't been ready for that last part. He didn't know what to do with praise. He barely knew what to do with neutrality. Coming from this man, in this place, it felt almost heavier than anger would have. He started, then stopped. "I'm sorry I broke the rule," he managed. "Son," the president said, and the word landed on the gravel between them like a coin. "Sometimes the rules are there to keep people in line. Sometimes they're there to keep people alive. Tonight, you broke the first kind to protect the second. That's a math I can live with." The boy's chest ached. He didn't trust himself to speak. "But don't get comfortable with it," the man added, a faint, grim smile tugging at his mouth. "You pull something like that again without thinking, and I'll tan your hide myself." It was the closest thing to a joke anyone had dared in hours. One of the bikers huffed something that might have been a laugh if you were feeling generous. A voice called from inside, urgent. "We need you in here." The president turned toward the door. Before he went in, he looked back over his shoulder at the object on the asphalt. Guard that, he ordered. Nobody touches it unless the doc says so. Nobody kicks it, nobody moves it, nobody breathes on it if they can help it. He glanced at the boy one more time. You. Sit. Don't move until someone tells you otherwise. The boy obeyed. Invisible habits were hard to break, and the command gave him something to cling to. He dropped onto the curb, legs suddenly boneless, and wrapped his arms around his knees. His sister crept out of the doorway and slid down beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. For a while, they just sat there, listening to the muffled sounds from inside, watching the lights from the vehicles paint the cracks in the pavement. Bubba, she whispered eventually. Yeah. Did you just save a baby? He stared at his hands, still faintly shiny under the harsh parking lot lights. I don't know, he said honestly. I think I just moved a thing that needed moving. Inside, the doctors worked. Outside, the night held its breath. By the time someone remembered to offer the boy a blanket, his fingers had gone numb. He hadn't noticed. His mind was still inside that room, tracing every beep, every shouted instruction, every half-caught phrase, as if he'd been standing at the bedside instead of on the curb. The nurse who brought the blanket wrapped it around his shoulders without saying much. Her eyes looked different now, less skeptical, more apologetic, maybe. She hesitated, then ruffled his hair once, awkwardly, like she wasn't sure if the gesture would be welcome. He wasn't sure either, but he didn't pull away. His sister had fallen asleep against his side, worn out by fear and cold and the kind of waiting kids aren't built for. Her head lolled against his shoulder, mouth slightly open, breath warm through the thin fabric of his hoodie. He kept glancing down to make sure her chest rose and fell in that easy, steady way the babies hadn't. Eventually, the door opened again. The older doctor stepped out, followed by the younger one and two nurses. They looked exhausted, their movements slower, shoulders bowed under the weight of hours. But there was something in their expressions that hadn't been there before. The boy recognized it from late nights in the garage when an engine that everyone thought was toast suddenly roared back to life. Relief. Disbelief. A kind of wary joy. How is he? One of the bikers demanded before the doctors had fully cleared the doorway. Better, the older doctor said. Not out of the woods, but better. His oxygen levels are holding. Heart rhythm is stabilizing. We've started a treatment course now that we have a working theory. What kind of theory? The president asked, stepping forward. The doctor glanced toward the object on the asphalt, now sitting inside a clear plastic containment bag one of the paramedics had dug out from the back of a truck. The bag was sealed tight, the slick residue trapped within. We think whatever compound was on or in that item was releasing something into the air, he said. Enough to irritate the lungs, depress cardiac function, maybe trigger a reaction we didn't initially recognize. Once the exposure stopped, once it was removed, his body started to recover. Slowly, but noticeably. So it was poison, one of the bikers said flatly. The younger doctor shifted uncomfortably. We can't say that without lab confirmation. There are industrial chemicals, cleaning solvents, even decorative coatings that can cause. The president cut him off with a look. You call it whatever you want, he said. To me, if you put something near my kid and he stops breathing, that's poison. No one argued with that. The boy listened, equal parts relieved and uneasy. He had been right about the object, about the smell, about the danger. The baby was still alive. Those were the good parts. The bad part, the part nobody had touched yet, sat between them like a loaded weapon left on the table. Who put it there? The question finally slipped out, voiced by a man whose vest carried fewer patches than some of the others, but whose eyes missed nothing. He stepped closer to the containment bag, staring at the distorted shape inside. Gifts don't just fall out of the sky, he said. That thing got here in a box, from somewhere, with somebody's name on it. So who sent it? The parking lot group shifted. A few exchanged looks. One man cleared his throat. I signed for it, he admitted. Couple days back. Came with some other stuff. No return address I recognized. Card said it was from a friend. A friend. The president repeated, the word tasting wrong. You see me opening presents from anonymous friends? The man looked down. Boss, it was wrapped nice, had the right kind of card, came with the order for the other gear. I figured, he trailed off. You figured wrong, the president said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was heavy enough to make the man flinch. The older doctor cleared his throat gently. Look, I understand you have internal matters to handle, he said. But from a medical standpoint, we'll need that item transported to a facility for full analysis. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with, in case there are delayed effects or residual exposure. You'll get it, the president said. But before it goes anywhere, I want a picture of every label, every mark, every scratch on that thing. I want to know which truck it came off of, which warehouse it sat in, and whose hands touched it before it touched my boy. His gaze drifted back to the child on the curb. And I want to know why the only person who saw it for what it was is 7 years old. The boy felt heat rise to his face, undeserved and unwanted. He hadn't done anything special, he told himself. He'd just added up pieces other people stepped over. But in this moment, with all these eyes on him, that felt like the most dangerous thing anyone could do. The younger doctor shifted, looking uncomfortable. He stepped forward, stopping a few feet from the boy. I owe you an apology, he said stiffly. I dismissed you when you spoke up. That was unprofessional. The words sounded like they'd been dragged out of him, one by one. The boy stared at him, unsure what to do with an apology from someone whose shoes cost more than his mom's paycheck. It's okay, he mumbled. It's not, the older doctor corrected, gentle but firm. He looked at the boy with something closer to genuine respect. You noticed a pattern we didn't. You connected the timing, the smell, the new object in the environment. That kind of thinking saves lives. Today, it may have saved his. He nodded toward the building. The boy's chest felt tight again, but in a different way. Pride wasn't an emotion he wore often. It didn't fit comfortably. It felt like a jacket he'd borrowed and wasn't sure he was allowed to keep on. His sister stirred beside him, blinking sleep out of her eyes. Is the baby okay? She asked blearily. The older doctor smiled for the first time that night, a small, tired curve of his mouth. He's better, he said. Still needs us to work hard. But yes, better. She nodded once, satisfied, and leaned back against her brother. Told you were right, she mumbled. The doctors drifted back inside one by one, drawn by monitors and protocols and the work that never really ended. The bikers lingered in the lot, circling the containment bag like it was something alive, something that might leap up if they turned their backs. The president stayed where he was for a long time, staring at the boy. You understand, he said eventually, that this doesn't end tonight. The boy swallowed. Because of the thing? Because somebody thought they could hurt my family, the president said. They thought they could send something into my house, dress it up pretty, and let it do their dirty work. That's not a mistake. That's a message. He paused, the muscle in his jaw twitching. And because a kid I told to stay in the kitchen had to be the one to read that message before any of us did. The boy didn't know what to say to that. So he said nothing. You're not in trouble, the man added, almost as an afterthought. Not the kind you're thinking, anyway. Your mama's going to give you an earful, but that's her job. He exhaled slowly. My job is to make sure this doesn't happen again. And that starts with figuring out who thought they could get to me through someone who can't even walk yet. The boy nodded. He understood that kind of math. Hurt the people they love to hurt them worse. He'd seen that equation play out in smaller ways his whole life. This was just the biggest version of it. He also understood something else, something that sat like a stone in his stomach. He was a witness now, not just to a baby getting sick, not just to doctors failing and then course-correcting. A witness to the moment everyone in this world realized there was a hidden enemy. Witnesses were useful. Witnesses were dangerous. Sometimes, witnesses weren't allowed to stay neutral. Come inside, the president said abruptly. You too, he added to the boy's sister. Your mom's about to tear the paint off the walls looking for you. They stood, legs stiff, blankets slipping from the boy's shoulders. He picked it up, more out of habit than need, and followed the man back toward the door. As they passed the containment bag, he couldn't help glancing down. The object sat there, distorted by clear plastic, caught and helpless. For something that had caused so much harm, it looked ordinary. That was the worst part, he thought. The most dangerous things he'd ever seen never looked dangerous at all. Inside, the air was still tense, but different. Less frantic, more focused. Nurses moved with purpose instead of barely controlled panic. The doctors' voices were lower now, their commands more measured. Through the open doorway, he caught a glimpse of the baby. There was still tape on his skin, still wires and tubes and blinking lights. But his color had shifted, just enough that you wouldn't compare him to storm clouds anymore. His chest rose and fell with more confidence, like his lungs had remembered how to do their job. The boy's shoulders sagged. He hadn't realized they'd been holding up the ceiling in his mind until that moment. His mother found them before he took 3 steps down the hall. Her eyes were wild, hair escaping its tie, apron splattered with dishwater and sauce. "Where have you been?" she demanded, voice shaking. If you've ridden this far into the story and you want to see how a simple act of courage drags this boy into a world of questions that might be more dangerous than the poison itself, don't forget to subscribe and keep your notifications on, because what comes in the next chapters will test loyalty, expose enemies, and prove that sometimes the smallest witness can blow open the biggest secrets. The clubhouse didn't go back to normal when the baby's breathing smoothed out. It couldn't. Normal would have meant someone turning the jukebox back on, beers clinking again, arguments restarting where they'd left off. Instead, the building hummed with a new kind of quiet, the kind that comes when people realize the threat isn't over just because the worst moment has passed. The boy sat at the end of a long table in the back room, his feet not quite touching the floor. His sister perched beside him, legs swinging, chin barely reaching the tabletop. Their mother hovered nearby, pretending to wipe down already clean surfaces, unwilling to stand too close and unable to walk away. On the wall, the clock's second hand ticked its dry little circle. He tried not to look at it. Time felt strange again, stretched thin and stacked on itself. The baby was still under watch, in that makeshift hospital room that had stolen the pool table's place. The doctors had settled into a rhythm there. Test, adjust, monitor, repeat. Every hour or so, someone would slip out to give an update. Each one carried the same cautious headline. Better. Still better. Not safe, but better. Every time, the boy's lungs loosened a fraction more. Every time, the president's shoulders dropped half an inch. Now, though, the conversation in the back room had nothing to do with heart rates and everything to do with intent. "Run it again," the president said. He stood at the head of the table, vest open, hands planted on the scarred wood. Around him, a half-circle of patched men leaned in, their expressions hard enough to crack stone. From the beginning. No skipping. A man with a shaved head and a patch that read Sergeant Tarames flipped open a notebook. His handwriting crawled across the page in cramped, efficient lines. "Package arrived Tuesday," he said. "Afternoon. Same truck as the gear order. Driver we've used before. Name," the president said. "Lyle. Goes by Lyle. No record that we know of. You want me to dig?" "Dig anyway." The note-taker nodded, pencil already scratching. "Box had the gear," he continued. "Smaller box inside with the item. Wrapped up nice. Gold and black." Card said, "For the newest prince of Harlow Ridge." No signature. One of the men snorted. "Cute." "Who opened it?" the president asked. "The kid." The younger, less decorated biker from earlier lifted his hand halfway, like admitting to a crime. "I mean the other kid. Not him." He jerked his chin toward the boy. "The baby's uncle. He was here, mid-shift. Thought it was from a buddy. Brought it in, set it up in the office. Boss, you said it looked nice." The president's jaw twitched. "I remember what I said." The boy did too. He'd heard it through a half-open door. "Makes the place look almost respectable," the man had joked. Everyone had laughed. Nobody had asked, who paid for it? 3 days after that, the baby starts coughing, the note-taker went on. "Everybody figures it's a cold. Then it's not." And all that time, another man muttered, "That thing's in there, humming away." The boy shifted in his seat. He could still feel the ghost of its weight in his hands, the slickness on his palms, the way his head had swum when he stood too close. "Could it be one of ours?" someone asked. The room chilled a few degrees with the question. Nobody answered immediately. Loyalty wasn't just a word in this building. It was a currency, a language, a shield. Suggesting betrayal from inside was like suggesting the roof might fall in just because you saw a crack. "I don't like saying it," the sergeant-at-arms said eventually, "but yeah, it could." Someone upset about decisions. Money. Territory. Some idiot thinking scaring the boss would make a point. "Scaring," another man repeated softly. "By almost killing an 11-month-old. Idiots don't think through consequences," the sergeant-at-arms replied. The boy listened, each word stitching a more complicated picture. He'd always known this world had enemies. He just hadn't expected them to aim so low. "You said the lab's taking it?" someone asked. "Yeah," the president said. "Doc's got a contact. They'll run their tests, send us a report." I want every line of that report on my desk the second it lands. If there's a name, a manufacturer, a label, I want it circled in red." He paused, then added, "But we're not waiting on that to start asking questions." He turned his head slowly, scanning faces. For a moment, the boy was grateful he wasn't a patched man. That gaze would have sliced him in half. Finally, the president looked back toward the far end of the table. "You too," he said. "Come here." The boy's stomach flipped. He glanced at his mother, who gave him a tiny nod that was equal parts go. And "Please be careful." His sister slid off the bench, clutching his sleeve. Together, they walked up the length of the table, the eyes of half a dozen men tracking them like spotlights. Up close, the patches looked even bigger. The skulls and numbers and names loomed at his eye level now. He could smell leather, motor oil, and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The president didn't make them climb onto chairs. He just crouched a little, bringing his face closer to theirs. It was a strangely vulnerable gesture, coming from someone who usually towered over a room. "I need you to tell me exactly what you saw," he said. "Not just tonight. Tuesday. The truck, the box, the smell. All of it. If something seems small, say it anyway. Small things kill." The boy swallowed. His mouth was dry, but he talked. He talked about the truck and the crate and the smaller box that had nearly slid off the dolly. He talked about the way the wrapper had shimmered, about the faint smell that had hit him in the hallway. Barely there, but enough to make his neck hairs stand up. He talked about wanting to follow, about his mother's voice dragging him back. His sister chimed in with details he'd missed. The pattern on the ribbon, the way one of the men had made a face when he picked it up, like he didn't like it but didn't want to say anything. The fact that, later, when she'd peeked into the office, the air tasted funny, but she'd thought it was just grown-up smell. The men listened, really listened. Nobody interrupted. Nobody laughed. When they finished, the president nodded slowly. "You both did good," he said. "You paid attention. You remembered. That's more than I can say for some adults I know." One of the older bikers snorted quietly, not entirely offended. "You're not part of this business," the president went on. "And if I had my way, you never would be. But someone tried to pull you into it by aiming at that baby. That means I owe you more than thanks. It means I owe you protection." The boy blinked. Protection wasn't a word he heard aimed at him often. More often, he heard warnings, restrictions, rules. Protection felt bigger. "What does that mean?" his mother asked, voice carefully controlled. "It means," the president said, straightening up again, "that until we know exactly who sent that thing and why, no one in this building raises a hand to this kid. No teaching him a lesson. No reminding him of his place. He broke a rule, but he did it to save my family. That puts him under my protection. Anyone got a problem with that, they bring it to me." He said the last sentence with a softness that made it scarier than any shout. No one answered. No one had a problem. Not out loud. The boy felt his sister's grip on his sleeve loosen slightly, like she'd been holding on to a rope and someone had taken some of the weight off. "This doesn't make you untouchable," the president said, looking down at him again. "You still listen to your mama. You still do what you're told in this house. But if trouble comes looking for you because of what you did tonight, it goes through me first. You understand?" "Yes, sir," the boy said. "Good." He straightened, the moment of intimacy over. He was the president again, the room's gravity shifting back into place. "Now," he said, voice returning to that hard, businesslike cadence, "we start making calls. Whoever sent that gift thought they were clever. Let's show them they're not." The boy and his sister were dismissed back to their bench. On the way, men who would normally ignore kids gave them small nods. A few clapped the boy on the shoulder, not quite gentle, but not rough either. He wasn't sure what to do with any of it. Praise, protection, responsibility. All he knew was that the next time a truck pulled into that lot, he would be watching it twice as hard. Sleep didn't come easy after a night like that. The boy tried anyway. He and his sister lay side by side on the narrow pull-out couch in the tiny upstairs room the clubhouse let them use when nights ran too long. The springs poked through the thin mattress in all the wrong places. The blanket itched. The sound of motorcycles starting and stopping outside bled through the thin walls like thunder. His sister snored softly, nose whistling on every third exhale. That sound, at least, was familiar. Safe. He stared at the water-stained ceiling and let his mind replay the night on a loop he didn't ask for. The baby's grayish skin. The screaming monitor. the weight of the object in his hands. The first clean breath he'd taken in the parking lot. The numbers on the portable monitor ticking up. The president's eyes when he said, "He saved my boy." Most kids his age measured big nights in fireworks or sleepovers. He measured this one in heartbeats and decisions nobody should have to make before they lost their baby teeth. At some point, the ceiling blurred. His eyes burned. Sleep ambushed him in short, shallow bursts. Every time he drifted off, he jolted awake, half sure he'd hear the monitor screaming again. Morning didn't so much arrive as creep in. The clubhouse looked different in daylight. Less dangerous, more tired. The neon sign out front was dark. The bar stools were empty, some turned sideways like they'd been abandoned mid-conversation. The floor still carried the scuff marks of a dozen frantic pairs of shoes. The boy padded into the kitchen, hair mussed, eyes grainy. His mother stood at the stove, stirring a pot of oatmeal like it had personally offended her. She didn't say good morning. She just glanced up, scanned his face to make sure he was in one piece, and went back to stirring. Breakfast was quiet. His sister yawned into her bowl, dribbling oats down her chin. At any other time, their mother would have scolded her. Today, she just handed over a napkin and let it go. "You're going to school," she said eventually, not looking at either of them. The boy blinked. "Today?" "Yes, today." Her voice had that tone it got when she was holding herself together by sheer force. Just because hell moved in here last night doesn't mean the rest of the world stops. You go. You act normal. You don't talk about what you saw. You don't bring this place into that one. He nodded slowly. It made sense in a way that hurt. There were two worlds, and he was expected to walk between them without letting one spill into the other. "What about the baby?" his sister asked quietly. "He's still being looked after," their mother said, ladling more oatmeal without being asked. "Doctors are staying for a while. I'll be here if anything changes." The boy wanted to argue. To say he should stay, should help, should listen at doors again. Instead, he grabbed his backpack. Rules were rules, even after nights when you broke them. School felt like a hallucination. The lights were too bright. The noise too normal. Kids laughed in the hallways, slammed lockers, complained about tests. Nobody's cousin had almost been killed by a gift. Nobody's principal had told them to stay invisible. The problems here, pop quizzes, lunch trades, who sat next to whom on the bus, felt flimsy, like props in a play. Up front, the teacher droned on about fractions. The boy stared at the board and saw the monitor's spiky line instead of numbers. At recess, his friends argued about a video game. He stood at the edge of the blacktop, scanning the patterns of kids running and jumping and shouting, and realized that part of his brain had permanently shifted into a different kind of scanning. Threat assessment, exit mapping, pattern recognition. "You okay?" one of his classmates asked, bumping his shoulder. "You look like someone stole your lunch money." He forced a smile. "Just tired." It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. The debt settled over him slowly that day, like dust. He felt it every time he thought about the baby's chest rising and falling. Every time he replayed the president's promise, protection, gratitude, responsibility. He had never liked owing people. Owing meant they could call it in when they felt like it. In his experience, that usually happened at the worst possible moment. But this debt was different. He hadn't agreed to it. It had been handed to him like one more thing to carry. At lunch, he stared at his sandwich until the edges curled. His brain wouldn't stop running what-ifs. What if he'd been sick that day and stayed home? What if he hadn't smelled anything? What if he'd stayed in the kitchen like he was told? What if the baby had died and the object had gone back to being just decoration? He didn't like the answers. When the final bell rang, he walked home slower than usual. The air outside tasted clean, plain, safe. He found himself checking it anyway, on instinct, like his nostrils had turned into alarms. The clubhouse came into view, squatting at the end of the street like a tired giant. Motorcycles lined the curb, silent and gleaming. The neon sign remained off. He pushed open the door and was met by a strange sight. No music, no laughter, but no panic either. Men sat at tables, cups of coffee in their hands instead of bottles. Conversations hummed at a low volume. Heads turned as he walked in, and for the first time in his life, those looks weren't purely dismissive. They weren't quite welcoming either. They were measuring. "Hey," someone called. "There he is." He froze. A biker he knew only as Freight, a wall of a man with arms like bridge supports, stood up and ambled over. The boy's stomach tightened, but the man's face held something softer than his size suggested. Freight scratched the back of his neck like the words itched. Got you something. He held out a small object, a keychain shaped like a tiny spark plug. The metal gleamed, clean and harmless. So you remember, Freight said gruffly. Engines talk before they die. You listen, you fix them. You listened last night. The boy took it, fingers curling around the cool metal. He wasn't sure what to say. Thanks, he managed. Don't make a big thing of it, Freight muttered, already turning away. Just clip it on your bag or something. As the boy threaded it through a zipper pull, he realized this was what a different kind of debt looked like. Not money, not favors, respect. It was heavier than he expected. He found his mother in the kitchen, as always. She hugged him a little longer than usual, then went back to chopping onions like the knife was the only thing keeping her tethered. How is he? The boy asked. Sleeping, she said. For real this time. Color's better. Docs are talking about transferring him to a real hospital soon. The kind with walls that match. And the thing? Gone, she said. On its way to some lab. Boss took pictures. He's been on the phone all day. As if summoned by the mention, the president appeared in the doorway. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. But his eyes were clear. Got a minute? He asked. The boy nodded and followed him out into the hallway. I made some calls, the president said. That gift didn't come from anybody on the list it was supposed to. Vendor says they never packed it. Card wasn't theirs either. The boy frowned. So somebody swapped it. At some point between warehouse and here, the man said. Somebody slipped something into our order and hoped we wouldn't notice. Why? The president gave him a tired half-smile. That's the magic question, isn't it? He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You're good at noticing things, he said. Better than most grown men. That's not a compliment. That's a fact. It kept my kid alive. It might keep other people alive if you keep using it right. The boy shifted, uncomfortable under the weight of that expectation. I'm not asking you to become something you're not, the man went on. You're a kid. You should be thinking about whatever kids think about. His mouth twisted briefly. But I can't pretend you didn't see what you saw. Once your eyes open like that, they don't shut again. He let the silence sit for a moment. So here's the deal, he said. You keep doing what you've always done. Notice things. File them away. If something feels wrong, if a smell, a sound, a face, a package, anything cuts sideways in your head, you tell your mama. She tells me. We handle it. You don't go pulling strange things out of rooms on your own again, you hear? The boy almost smiled. Yes, sir. Good. Because if you scare me like that one more time, my heart's going to give out, and I don't have 15 doctors on call. It was a joke. A dark one, but a joke. The boy let himself laugh, just a little. The president sobered. Last thing he said. I meant what I said about protection. Word's already out that somebody tried something in my house. Some people will see that as weakness. Some as opportunity. Either way, eyes are on us. That includes you. He tapped 2 fingers against his own temple. Keep using this, he said. It's your best weapon. Better than anything we carry. As the boy walked back toward the kitchen, the spark plug keychain bumped against his leg. He thought about weapons, visible and invisible. About debts and protection. About how, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just surviving in the background. He was part of the story whether he wanted to be or not. The report came back on a Wednesday. It arrived the old-fashioned way, in a plain envelope, hand-carried by a man who looked like he'd never stepped foot in a place like this before. The boy caught a glimpse of him through the front window, a crisp shirt, polished shoes, a tie that might have cost more than the clubhouse's monthly power bill. He lingered in the kitchen doorway as the man handed over the envelope to the president. His sister, perched on a stool peeling carrots, watched too, eyes tracking every movement like it was a movie. Is that about the thing? She whispered. Yeah, he whispered back. The president didn't open it right there in the common room. He took it to the back office, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft click that sounded louder than any slam. The building held its breath. Even people who didn't know the details could feel the tension. They'd heard enough to understand the basics. Baby almost died. Weird object involved. Lab tests ordered. Cause and effect. The boy's mother kept working, but her hands moved slower. Every clink of a dish echoed. Every squeak of a shoe on the floor seemed too loud. Minutes stretched. When the office door finally opened again, the president's face was carved in stone. He walked into the main room with the envelope in one hand. The report inside half-folded. Pages creased like he'd gripped them too hard. "Everybody who needs to hear this, in the back," he said. The boy's instinct was to keep his seat. This sounded like grown-up business. Then the president's gaze flicked to him, just for a second, and he realized everybody included him now. He followed the flow of bodies into the back room. Men ringed the same table as before. The air felt thicker this time, like the walls had moved closer. The president spread the pages on the table. The boy could see lines of printed text, graphs, a blurry black and white photo of the object sealed in its plastic bag. "The lab ran their tests," the president said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a chain through fog. "That gift of ours was coated with a compound they're still not finished naming. Combination of industrial solvent and a little something extra to make it hang in the air longer than it should. So it was poison," one of the men said. The president nodded once. "Designed to be slow, not instant. Just enough to make a small body fail in all the confusing ways at once. Lungs, heart, blood pressure. Nothing obvious. Nothing that screams one simple answer." The boy's stomach rolled. Slow poison. Confusing poison. The kind that made even 15 doctors chase their tails. "Any labels?" the sergeant-at-arms asked. "Maker's mark? Sticker." The president tapped one line on the paper. "Custom application. Likely altered post-manufacture," he recited. Translation: somebody took a real product and doctored it themselves. His jaw flexed. "But they did slip up," he said. "Lab traced the base compound to a small batch order. Specialty stuff. Sold to a shell company downtown 2 months ago. That company only ever bought one thing, from one supplier, then closed its doors on paper." "Name?" the sergeant-at-arms asked. "Harleys Imports," the president said. "Sounds like a candle shop, right? No address anybody's ever seen. Just a P.O. box and a phone number that goes nowhere." The boy frowned. It did sound harmless. That was the point. Somebody went to a lot of trouble. A biker muttered. "Yeah," the president said. "Which tells us 2 things. 1, this wasn't some idiot with a grudge and a how-to video. This was planned. Specific. 2, whoever it was knows enough about how we live to slip something into a shipment we'd actually open." He pulled another page from the envelope. This one wasn't from a lab. It was a printed screenshot. The boy could see the grainy outline of an exterior door, a loading dock, a truck backed up to it. "Security cam from the warehouse," the president said. "Watch." He slid the paper toward the middle of the table. It showed a man standing near the truck's tailgate, wearing a cap pulled low. The timestamp in the corner was from the day their shipment went out. "Driver steps away to take a smoke," the president said. "This guy comes in from the side. Hands in pockets like he belongs there. Pops the truck, does something with a smaller box, closes up, walks off. 42 seconds. No one stops him. No one questions him. "Face?" someone asked. The president grimaced. "Blurry. Angle's bad. But..." He slid another page forward. "We pulled stills from before that. Same man at the gate, signing in as a subcontractor. Picture's better. Not perfect, but better." The boy leaned forward, heart thudding. The image was still low-res, but the features were clearer. Narrow face. Slight beard. Eyes that didn't quite match the smile he'd given the camera. "Anyone recognize him?" the president asked. The room shifted. Nobody answered. For a moment, the boy thought maybe it would stay that way, that the man in the picture was just another stranger. Then one of the older bikers swore under his breath. "I'll be damned," he said. "I know that face." Head snapped in his direction. "Name?" the president said. The older man's jaw clenched. "Goes by Rook," he said. "Used to ride with us. Years back. Before your time, kid," he added, glancing at the boy. "Got bounced when he decided the rules were optional." The president's eyes darkened. "You telling me this is an ex-member?" "Yeah," the older man said. "Last I heard, he was sniffing around with some people who don't like us much. Guess he found himself a new hobby." The boy's skin prickled. Betrayal from inside. The worst kind. "So he knows the clubhouse," the sergeant-at-arms said. "Knows who's important. Knows a package with a cute card and a pretty wrapping will make it past the front door. And he knows," another man added, "that if you hit a man's kid, you hit him where it hurts most." The president's hands curled into fists on the tabletop. "He wanted me angry," he said. "Distracted. Maybe guilty, if the kid had." He cut himself off. "He wanted confusion. He got it for a while. Then his gaze flicked to the boy again. Didn't count on small eyes seeing what big ones missed, he said. The boy shifted under the weight of that look. He hadn't asked to be part of this, but there he was, woven into the story's center. What now? The boy asked before he could stop himself. The room went quiet. Adults weren't used to children asking that question in this context. Now, the president said slowly, we remember that we're not just a clubhouse full of men. We're a family. And someone just declared war on our family in the ugliest way they could think of. He straightened up, pushing the papers into a neat stack with more force than necessary. We find him, he said. We find Rook. We find anyone he's working with. We make sure they understand that if they come for our kids, they're not playing games anymore. The boy felt a knot form in his stomach. He'd hoped this would end with a lab report and maybe a lock on the door. Instead, it sounded like the first step in something bigger, something that would ripple far beyond the walls of this building. He also realized, with a small jolt of dread, that as someone who knew what Rook's handiwork smelled like now, he might be useful again. The president must have read some of that fear in his face. This is not your fight, he said. You hear me? You did your part. You saved my boy. The rest of this is on us. The boy nodded, but doubt lingered. In his experience, once you knew a secret, it was never entirely not your fight again. By the end of the week, the baby was gone. Not gone in the way everyone had feared. Gone in the way doctors meant when they said stable enough to transfer. An ambulance took him to a real hospital, the kind with automatic doors and pastel walls and cafeteria food. The boy watched from the clubhouse steps as they loaded the tiny body, now cocooned in blankets instead of wires, into the back. The president rode with him, climbing in without a word, face set. Bikers lined the curb like an honor guard. Nobody cheered. Nobody spoke. They just stood, arms crossed, watching until the vehicle turned the corner and disappeared. Inside, the building felt wrong without the constant background panic. The machines were gone, leaving behind faint indentations on the floor and smudges on the walls where cords had rubbed. The "No snitching" sign still hung crooked, but under it, the air seemed changed forever. The boy walked into the now empty makeshift hospital room and stopped in the doorway. Without the baby, without the doctors, it looked like a bad memory someone had packed up too fast. The bed sat in the middle, sheets stripped, mattress bare. The shelf where the object had rested was just a shelf again, its wood grain unremarkable. He stepped inside, feet whispering on the floorboards. For a second, the silence roared louder than any monitor. His sister appeared at his elbow. Feels weird in here, she said. Yeah, he agreed. Like when you wake up from a nightmare, she added. But the room still remembers it. He glanced at her, surprised. Her words fit better than anything he'd come up with. They stood there for a while, saying nothing. Eventually, their mother called them back to the kitchen. There were floors to mop, glasses to wash, a life to keep running. Throughout the day, people kept stopping the boy. A nod from one. A good job, kid from another. A rough hand ruffling his hair when he walked past the bar. He didn't know what to do with any of it. Praise felt like wearing someone else's jacket. Warm, but a little too big in all the wrong places. At one point, Freight cornered him by the jukebox. You know, the big man said, leaning against the machine. Back when I was your age, only thing I ever noticed was which fence I could jump without getting caught. The boy shrugged. I just smelled something. Freight laughed. You smelled something, paid attention, connected it to an object, then moved the object when 15 people with degrees didn't. That's not just, that's rare. The boy stared at his shoes. I didn't do it to impress anybody, he said. I know, Freight said. That's why it's impressive. He pushed himself off the jukebox. Listen, he added, voice softening. There's going to be noise about this. People looking at you, talking about you, maybe even trying to use you. Use me. You see things, Freight said. You saw the thing that almost killed the boss's kid. People who didn't see it are going to be scared of that. People who did see it are going to want it on their side. He shrugged. Just remember who you are, he said. You're not their detective. You're not their weapon. You're a kid who got handed a moment and did the right thing with it. That's enough. The boy nodded slowly. That night, when the clubhouse had emptied out and the neon sign buzzed alone, he sat on the back steps, spark plug keychains spinning around his finger. The sky above was dull, city-lit, stars drowned out by the glow of street lamps and convenience store signs. His sister sidled up beside him, dropping down with a little thump. "Do you think the baby's going to remember you?" she asked. He thought about the tiny face, the tape, the wires, the way the eyes had finally fluttered open once the air cleared. "No," he said. "He's too little." Then what was the point? He turned the keychain over in his hand, metal catching the light. "The point," he said slowly, "wasn't for him to remember me. It was for him to have something to remember at all." She mulled that over, feet kicking at an invisible rhythm. "Do you think they're going to find the bad guy?" she asked. "They're going to try," he said. "Are you scared?" He thought about Rook's blurry face on the printout, about shells of companies and doctored products, about people who knew how to slip poison into places children slept. "Yeah," he said. "A little." She nodded solemnly. "Me too." They sat like that for a while, sharing a fear that felt too big and too simple at the same time. Eventually, the back door creaked open. The president stepped out, hands in his pockets. He wasn't wearing his vest now, just a plain t-shirt, tattoos climbing his arms. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. The boy shrugged. "It's your steps." The man chuckled and lowered himself onto the concrete with a small groan. "My knees don't agree, but yeah." For a while, none of them spoke. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was full. "I went to see him," the president said finally. "Hospitals got him hooked up to all their fancy gear. But he's awake. Mad, actually. Doesn't like the wires. That's my kid." A small smile tugged at the boy's mouth. "He grabbed my finger," the man went on. "Squeezed it like he was trying to bend it. Stronger than he was 2 days ago. Whole room felt lighter, just from that." He glanced down at the boy. "He's going to grow up with stories," he said. "Family tradition. How he survived, who was there, what it cost. Sooner or later, your name's going to be in those stories." The boy shifted, uncomfortable. "He doesn't need to know about me." "That's not how stories work," the man said. "We don't get to choose which parts stick. He'll know there were 15 doctors and a kid who saw something they didn't. He'll know you moved a thing nobody else thought to move. That matters. Not because it makes you a hero, because it teaches him to listen when the quiet voices speak up." He paused. "You changed something here," he said. "Not just for me. For us. You reminded a room full of men who think they've seen everything that we haven't. That we can still miss the obvious. That sometimes the smallest person in the room carries the sharpest eyes." The boy looked down at his hands, remembering how shaky they'd been. "I was scared," he admitted. "Good," the president said. "Means you're not stupid." He sighed, leaning back on his elbows, staring at the sky. "I'm not going to pretend I'm suddenly a better man because of this," he said. "I'm still going to make decisions you don't like. I'm still going to send people out into ugly situations. But I am going to remember, every time I walk past a kid in this place, that one of you saved what I couldn't." The boy swallowed, throat tight. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Debts aren't always about owing," the president replied. "Sometimes they're about acknowledging. I owe you my honesty, my protection, my ear when you say something smells wrong." He glanced at the spark plug keychain dangling from the boy's fingers. "And maybe, one day, when you're old enough to make your own choices, I'll owe you the truth about what this life costs. So you can decide if you want any part of it." The boy thought about that. About choices. About costs. About the thin line between the world inside this building and the one outside it. "Right now," he said, "I just want to not have to do anything like that again." The president nodded. "That's fair." He pushed himself to his feet with a groan. "Go to bed," he said. "Both of you. Let the grown-ups chase the ghosts for a while." As he disappeared back inside, the boy and his sister sat in the lingering quiet. "You think everything's going to go back to normal?" she asked. He looked at the clubhouse, at the door the ambulance had rolled through, at the window where the neon sign's reflection flickered. "I don't think normal means what it used to," he said. He clipped the spark plug keychain to his belt loop, letting it hang where he could feel its weight. A reminder, not of danger, but of what it meant to act when you saw danger. As they finally stood and headed for the stairs, the building creaked around them, old with settling. The world outside kept spinning. Trucks would still come. Packages would still arrive. People would still make choices for reasons he might never fully understand. But now, if something smelled wrong, if the air tasted like pennies or the room remembered a nightmare, there was at least one kid in the Harlow Ridge clubhouse who knew what that meant, who knew the cost of staying quiet, who knew that sometimes the unthinkable thing wasn't breaking the rules. It was watching someone you could have saved slip away because you didn't. If this story has kept you on the edge of your seat, if you felt every beat of that baby's heart and every step that boy took out of the shadows. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Make sure you're subscribed, turn on all notifications, and stay tuned. Because in this world, every quiet act of courage has consequences, and the next story might start with a kid just like him seeing something the rest of us miss.